Awesome. And we are live on YouTube. Thanks again for the folks that are joining. This is the NPM Open RFC call. I've posted the notes and agenda link in the chat. If you'd like to add yourselves as attendees, that'd be great. Um, and I think today, Mike, you've agreed to take notes potentially.
Yep.
Awesome. That'd be great. I know Claudia has been taking them the last few times, or at least the last time we did the call. So again, we'll be following along the agenda that's in that meeting notes doc. We do our best to post the agenda actually in the RFC's repo of the NPM org as soon as we can. We are now doing weekly calls essentially, alternating between the Open RFC call that you're in today and then a more deep dive topical discussion that will alternate same time, same day of the week, but usually focused on one specific topic. So today we can, towards the end of the call, decide what we would like to be queuing up for next week's call. Oftentimes that'll just be whatever is eating into most of the Open RFC time. But again, some quick housekeeping items. The reason for this call and the reason that we, get together is ideally to be moving forward RFCs, initiatives, bringing up and bubbling feedback from the community and working closely with the community to collaborate on NPM open source software and pushing through initiatives and features and that the community wants to see from us. Quick code of conduct acknowledgement as well. All interactions on the RFC's repo and also in this call are under code of conduct, which is linked actually in the RFC's agenda issue. So if you're wondering where that is, it's actually pointed at the .com code of conduct policy that we have. And so just being mindful and being respectful in these calls is what we're aiming for, and allowing folks to speak and, ensure that, it's just a really welcoming atmosphere that we create here. Again, the desired outcomes and intentions is to ideally be moving through new features and queuing things up that we know the community wants. I guess there is a bit of an announcement for this RFC call. This is the first Open RFC call that we're having with community since we've noted some news that happened on Monday. And maybe I'll give the floor to Isaac to quickly touch on what that announcement was.
Yeah, NPM is getting bought by GitHub. This is not yet a done deal in the sense of being like officially closed. So that's why you're seeing us all very carefully talk in the present tense rather than the past tense. But it is in process now, and it's publicly known and announced, and I'm pretty excited about it. I think it's a really good outcome for NPM and for the community and for this team and just our ability to keep doing stuff with less distraction and less stress.
Yeah, it's awesome potential opportunity. And we're hoping to continue on with these calls for sure is the intent as well for now. So awesome. I know also queued up in the agenda. Was there any other announcements folks have? Wes, anybody else on the call? If not, we can queue up the first issue. So I know, Isaac, you created this sort of last minute in the last day or so, and we were talking about it internally a bit before the call.
9 hours ago.
Yeah, exactly. So issue 113, so retro and cleanup of the actual RFC's repo itself, and actually the RFCs that we've previously ratified. Maybe you can speak a bit to the intent here.
Yeah, so essentially we have this pretty dialed in process for proposing RFCs, for getting the documentation done in a pull request, and then discussing it here in this forum and on GitHub, and then sort of finalizing it with the results of that discussion and moving it into the accepted folder within the RFC's repo. What we don't have is as good of a process for sort of circling back on things that maybe no longer make sense. Like if the context changed between when we proposed that RFC and discussed it versus now, that it comes time to implement it. And I think the worst thing we could do is just sort of take any accepted RFC as a rule written in stone that we have to implement it exactly like this. Like sometimes that just doesn't make sense. And so there's a handful now that have kind of accumulated in the accepted folder, where either we have decided to go to a different direction, or the implementation subtly or somewhat differs from sort of what is in the RFC. And so I wanted to just kind of mention here that we're going to be working out sort of what the process looks like for that. My goal is to balance, on the one hand, I don't want to have a super heavyweight process, right? So like the IETF requires a new RFC to update or invalidate any previous RFC, and they are kind of taken as written in stone. But that imposes a lot of extra work on us and everybody else, and people consuming them now have to like follow all the links to see what was invalidated by or updated by some subsequent RFC. And on the other hand, I know that people sort of treat RFCs as something like a commitment once they're accepted, and like some folks on this call, like we'll start building other sort of outside of the npm CLI. We'll build tooling that relies on that eventually being the way that it gets implemented. So I want to minimize the amount of time that the amount of cases where people are kind of left stranded or left hanging with a broken promise with respect to that. So I don't have like a firm proposal about how we go about doing that, but I do think that might be like just sort of figuring out what the process is might be something that we do put in an RFC and have some discussion around. I posted the issue so that I wouldn't forget it. Unless everybody here just says, yeah, you know what, Isaac, just cut stuff out, it's fine. I can do that. Like that's kind of been our process for updating these things with implementation details thus far. And I think mostly that's fine, especially in small cases where it's like something subtle, like, oh, we thought the file would be named this, and we actually settled on this other thing. I'll just update the accepted RFC, and you can look at the Git history if you want to see how it changed. But I think for more major things, one example that came to mind, or that popped out at me, is the handling of root permissions and the handling of link packages. So as we've been going through the implementation with Arborist, the RFC, which one was the link one? The link one was probably the most egregious.
11. It's
yeah. So yeah, I'm looking at number 11 and 12. 11, like that's just not how we're going to be doing npm link. Like it was a good idea. It seemed reasonable at the time, given the refactoring and rewriting that's happened in the last 6-7 months. This decision that made sense 14 months ago kind of no longer does. So similar with number 12, running as root, we've kind of settled on within npm 6 on this approach that more sort of in a more somewhat focused way targets the actual problem that people were running into. And we're going to continue that with npm 7. So this somewhat more disruptive approach that number 12 suggests is not something we're going to do. So like I could just delete those files. I could move them to a archive or reconsidered folder or something like that. And I think one thing that Darcy brought up when I mentioned this to him this morning was like, let's maybe just have a PR that removes it, and then we can discuss it on the PR. So at least it's not something that kind of happens silently.
I think, in terms of terminology, what came to mind was remediation or remediated RC, or something that's like pulled out essentially. So we don't lose track of, in terms of the way we want to phrase or like look at these things. Again, we've sort of changed paths around the implementation. And if we want to pull out an RFC in its entirety, then I still think it should live as an artifact somewhere, and pulling it out just by removing the file doesn't seem right. I think it should go somewhere. So potentially, a remediated folder might be accurate, or
Yeah, we can.
archive. I don't know.
Archive is probably a little bit less of a 10-cent word for people who don't speak English as their first language. But yeah, I could create an archive folder in there pretty easily and just move those things over to it. And then the assumption is basically everything that gets into accepted either eventually in the fullness of time ends up in the implemented folder, potentially with some, small or minor updates, or gets moved into the archive with some note saying, hey, we're not going to do this thing for these reasons.
Yeah, and I think this speaks to the drift that there is in terms of we might be moving quicker in terms of getting consensus around the roadmap versus the actual implementation, and we get to that and we realize that we've queued up something that we want changed. So I think that this concept and creating a process around that is good. That we're mindful that we don't want to lose, these artifacts about decisions we made, but we want like pull them out in a way that we're also communicating why we're going to pull them out or we're going to change them. So obviously this would come with a pull request, right? Like, so to move the file into that archived folder or remediate or whatever we want to call it, I think would be smart to each time that's happening, that there's an individual pull request that we can point to that says why this is happening, and then we can actually reference that in these calls going forward. So I think that makes sense to me. I think it's addressing something that's happened based on the fact that certain things were accepted almost a year ago or more, that obviously our focus or the way that we're going to actually execute on those things has changed. So to me, it makes sense. Yeah. Anybody else have any comments on that?
So I would like to, you mentioned that it comes with a PR and a reason. I think it would be beneficial to add the reason to the document in the PR. So like if you have the RFC and it's merged, maybe when you archive it, put a section at the top that's that, so that folks don't have to like go and find the PR that moved it from accepted to archived. If they could just see like right at the top of that, here's the reason why it was moved. I think that'd be good.
Yeah, I think that's great. And actually, just as we're saying this, and I know Mike's taking notes, a good action item here is to put that into the README on the RFC's repo, just to say this is the practice that if we're going to pull something out, it's going to go into this folder, and it should be, the actual RFC should be updated with a section about the reasoning why, and then yeah, that's perfect, I think. Awesome. Did anybody else have any comments on that, or can we move forward? Good to go. Awesome. So moving forward, the issue number 110, remove DS store, which I pulled this into the agenda. This is something that I think ties in nicely with other issues we've seen come up about certain things finding their way into releases or find themselves into package, distros. We need to be mindful of this, and so yeah, I just wanted to put on our radars, specifically my radar. I'm cutting a release today, which should go out probably shortly after this call. This is just something we need to be super mindful of. Roy, I think actually you had queued up a ticket previously about identifying what those files were, or what that, I'm not sure what, if you remember the ticket number.
Yeah, it's on NPM pack list. Let me send the link. But basically, you expand the list of ignored files.
Yeah, if you could maybe comment on this issue specifically with referencing that original one, just to
Yeah.
consolidate these. It's not necessarily a duplicate, but they're obviously related. And the reason why I brought it up is just to be super mindful of this kind of stuff. There's no reason we should be shipping.
Oh, I can totally take like an extra minute after the call and just put a proper RFC so that this is on track, right? Like it's on our radar.
Would love it if you've got the cycles to do that. Great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So on this, there's little that we can do without it being a breaking change, right? If you have, and the problem that's been brought up a couple of times in the past now is, if you have a files declaration in your package JSON that says lib, and you have a bunch of files in lib and you just want to include them all, we don't kind of reapply the default ignore rules within those included folders. So anything in that lib folder, including a .git folder, including DS store or anything like that, will be included. And that's sort of, that is a break and change because people may rely on that, right? If you include a folder, we say, all right, I'm including this whole folder and everything in it, like you've declared it in files. That's sort of sacrosanct.
I took this as a little bit more directed directly at our distribution, like at the CLI.
Do we have a
ensuring
DS store in the CLI somewhere?
I don't know if it gets when we pack it for Node. I'm not sure if there's certain files that are getting picked up when we generate docs. Specifically, I think there might be some crufty files. That's what I took that as, just to be mindful for our team specifically. What you're speaking to is a bit more about creating a standard that npm when packing would ignore, let's say, DS store files, which you want to be, as you're saying, be explicit about. That would be a breaking change if we implemented something to ignore a file that you've included explicitly in the past, right?
Yeah, so I think we need some more details about what exactly the poster is looking for here, because I'm interpreting it as more like an RFC and not just a bug report for the CLI.
Which would align to maybe what Roy's already presented.
Yeah.
And so commenting on that would give the clarification, I think.
Yep, sounds good.
Cool. So moving on, issue number 4, this was the scheduling of I think this got pulled in by accident. Just the agenda label hasn't been removed, so I'll do that right now. But again, this was a poll that we ran previously for the alternating deep dive conversation. And what might be good just at this time is to potentially, if we can look into the future, see if there's a specific topic we would want to queue up for next week's deep dive call. Does anybody have any strong feelings there?
I think the one we really need to talk about is the 2FA thing.
So stage publishes?
Stage publish, yeah, that one, yeah.
Are those two different things, though? Are they? I thought they were two separate. Talking about 2FA and like CI and like stage publishing are separate things, are they not?
So they're linked in the sense that when the automating publishes was brought up in the package maintenance working group, and Wes has historical context here as well. Dominicus, who's also joined these calls, went off and did a bunch of research. Did I lose?
Nope, we still got you.
Okay.
Yeah, your audio's still there. Your video's just dead, yeah.
Okay, sorry, apologize about that. Went off, did a bunch of research, and we commented that we thought at least a first step on npm side to try to solve for the downstream, or actually upstream, user flow was to present this new mechanism for staging publishes. So if your CI runs wild, there's a sort of safe place to be staging a publish, and then eventually still manually having to do a step up, which still would require two-factor auth to essentially promote a package to be published, right? So these two things are I think very much linked. It's a sophistication in what we offer today in terms of publishing packages. It's going to unlock a whole bunch of awesome capabilities for us if we move forward with this. Blocked obviously by doing work on the server side, on the infrastructure side, but I think definitely there's critical details of how we actually like build I think the CLI tooling, or what the expectation is from the community would be for how this actually is implemented. I know that there's some folks that have strong opinions like Wes about this, so it might be good to deep dive on that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think Stage Publishes makes the most sense as a deep dive, and I'd almost prefer to just not go into it here in too much greater detail, because it's something we should tackle next week and really go through all of the use cases that we hope that it addresses, and make sure that they are all getting addressed, because there are some interesting trade-offs to be made, where doing the kind of the maximal way of addressing one use case means that we have to leave another one behind, and I want to try to make a good compromise there.
Sounds good. So I think we're.
Can I just say I have we didn't really discuss learnings from doing the first deep dive last week.
Okay.
I was wondering if because this one also has a lot of contentious details. It might be valuable to refine the talk, like what we want to discuss a little better than we did last week. Because I think last week we didn't quite end on resolved issues either, which is maybe not a bad thing when they're just not, going to be resolved, but still it would be, I think we could do a slightly better job of staying close to topic than we did. I don't know if anybody disagrees with me on that, but
yeah, I think I should probably add time box the discussion, because I had like an agenda put together to make sure we track all the items that I wanted to go over, right? But I think I fail at like time boxing the discussion of things so that we can actually go through all items. That's probably a good thing to keep in mind.
Sounds good. So a clear agenda, ensuring that we stick to that time box conversations and try to punt things that we can, so I'll be mindful for the next call. Like, I'll try to be the one to be on top of that then. Going forward.
Yeah, and probably a good idea going over is that in any discussion that goes over that time box time, like it just means that it needs more discussion, right? And we give it some more time to go back to the RFC and like go over GitHub, like wait for more feedback. Because yes, we can see like things like last week, like it can get really long.
And that's not to say that we won't bring that discussion back up in that time slot, right? Like it's not saying that we're done with workspaces. The implementation is still being built out. So and going forward, I think again, it's just that bi-weekly cadence is just an open, let's say like an open hour of time that we are queuing up something, and if it just happens to be workspaces again, that's what we can do. But I think in this call, I think we're at least the consensus, or the majority of folks, I think, are agreeing right now that we'd like to deep dive next week for Stage Push.
Yeah, one question about it though, like if we are to do, let's say, staging, we should probably run a poll like for every one of these, because depending on the topic, we want certain people to attend, right? People that have been already engaged with the RFC. So we should probably ping them, like get their feedback on what time works best for them.
Yeah, that sounds good. So takeaway there is let's ping folks that we know would be good to have on that call as soon as possible. Just double check if the time is going to work for them, so we ensure that attendance will be good. And then let's ensure, based on having effective meetings, let's make sure that we have some actionable items at the end of these deep dives, just to make sure that there's going to be follow-up either in the RFC, or we're actually making, we're moving forward appropriately. Is that good?
Cool. Good.
And another thing to do, we are now posting, Wes, just to your note, we are now posting the meeting notes back into the actual RFCs repo. So we'll do a better job at cross-linking with the closed agenda topic, but also trying to promote that, you know, there are artifacts and there are potentially actions in that artifact for maybe yourself or even other folks to take on. Again, Mike's taking notes right now in the HackMD document, but we eventually put that into a file that then gets a markdown file that then gets added to the RFC's repo, right? So we're getting better at obviously tracking and trying to keep ourselves accountable about following up on issues, PRs, et cetera, right?
To be clear, I have no problem. I think it's been going really well. The artifacts, I don't personally read them, but I come to the call, so it's not, you know, that doesn't necessarily matter too much to me. I was just hoping not to sorry, I've got a lot of things going on. I got the baby and everything. Not to end, because where we kind of ended last time was, okay, we had a bunch of really good discussions, but we didn't even like have a really good next steps, you know, thing. That's all I wanted to make sure. And it sounds like everybody's on the same page with making sure we do that.
So yeah. I think the next steps from the workspaces deep dive was essentially, and we didn't document or clarify this as clearly as we should have, obviously, because we're talking about it. But I think that the main takeaway that we had was, you know, we had some discussion, got some buy-in on like, let's do you know, a small first step that doesn't kind of paint us into a corner, and then update the workspaces RFC with those decisions. And that has happened. I mean, I saw Roy, I haven't actually reviewed it, but I saw Roy actually did post an update to the RFC with that, with some of that stuff. So, you know, I think it's probably would be good to circle back and maybe make that more clear, like when that has happened, when an action item has been actioned. But oh, baby, hi, baby. But yeah, and we can do the same thing with the stage publishes. I think the main thing that I want to get out of that kind of high bandwidth conversation is like, what are you know, what are the trade-offs that we're all comfortable with? Let's get everybody kind of aligned on the general direction, and not try to go into, you know, not try to go into discussions or questions that could be better handled in an asynchronous way and in a more textual form.
For sure.
Yep.
Anything else? Any other feedback from, I guess, that deep dive that we had last week for folks that might have been on that? Roy, do you have a good comment just about trying to time box things?
Yeah, no, I about that deep dive, like I did the work of like cleaning up the RFC, making sure it was up to date with what we discussed, and also like adding the dictionary that Darcy suggested. Like it made tons of sense. So now like it uses the same words everywhere to define the specific concepts, and they are all defined at the bottom in the dictionary section that like describes each one of them. So like it's very scientific now, and you read, like it actually makes sense. There's no more room to like lose language. I don't know, like it's just more I was just so happy with the result after doing that. It was a great feedback.
Reducing ambiguity is great. So,
yeah,
that's awesome. I appreciate that. So I think that speaks to the next item on the agenda, which is the actual RFC itself for the workspaces, which I think we can skip over unless there was a follow-up there.
I would actually suggest that we do the next one before that, because I don't know, maybe workspaces there might be more to discuss, but the publish confirmation prompt should be good to go. That one is, we discussed it already. I updated the RFC. So can we do that instead?
Yeah, okay. So you want to skip to the publish confirmation prompt and whether we can actually ratify it, you think? Or are we at that place?
Yeah. So can you see my screen?
Yep, looks good. So just speak, if you can, just speak through it.
Yeah, because this is very simple. It's just basically adding a confirmation at npm publish. So because basically, describing what we have here, currently today, when you have two-factor auth enabled, you have this unintended user experience where you get to kind of review the contents of your package before publishing them. And this RFC is about making that like more official. So the feedback we gather from all the discussion is that we should implement it behind an opt-in experimental flag for npm 7, and non-TTY like should just skip the prompt altogether, since doesn't really make sense to have it there. So we have this small example here showing you a little bit what it will look like. So basically, you npm publish, you have the flag. Of course, you can just define this on your npm RC instead, and it prompts you this small confirmation at the end. So defaults to no. Also some feedback we got from the RFC. So basically, you have to confirm now when you publish a package, and you can also just provide a yes flag and just keep that all together.
Yeah, I appreciate you updating this and cleaning it up based on that original feedback. I love this, and I like the approach of putting it behind a flag, and then we'll move forward with it based on similar to Node's approach in terms of the experimental flags that they've been using and promotion of features that way. Get real users using this in the wild, and again, there's options for how you can implement this for your own teams or for yourself. And then yeah, I think this is pretty, from my end, it's pretty uncontroversial, and it's something that I think I would love to see, especially because I fat finger publish and other things all the time. So
yeah.
So I have one slight bit of pushback on this, which is, can we not put the word experimental in the config flag, because it basically imposes an extra maintenance as well as usage burden by having that. It makes sense in some cases. I'm not trying to criticize Node's decision to have experimental in some of their flags. But essentially then when we drop, when we make it a flag that is no longer experimental, now we have two names for the same thing in our config stack, which is already kind of a mess. Right. And the simpler way is to say, well, if you do npm publish -- confirm or whatever right now, then that will continue working exactly the same when we default it to on or default it to off or whatever. Then we just basically have a Boolean flag in npm 7.1 or npm 8. It stops defaulting to false and starts defaulting to true.
So my only question there is, and I'm pretty sure this is the reasoning behind adding experimental, is that if the behavior changes when it becomes non-experimental, you have a clear way to implement that without breaking everybody who was using the experimental version. Maybe this won't change since it's so simple, but
No, yeah, I like that. Yeah.
The argument for an experimental flag is it's something that you intend to no longer have configurable at some point in the future, right? So like experimental module system or whatever is actually intended to be a preview of Node's eventual final module system.
Sure.
With the understanding that there's going to kind of be an instability between here and there. In this case, it's a little different, like, because I want to someday say npm publish -- no confirm and have that just not confirm. And it's similar to how we switched the -- save from default false to defaulting true.
So I think I have a tangible example or analogy or reference to where this has caught, let's say, the development community in the past. So if anybody's ever done front-end development at all and had to deal with vendor prefixes and now has to maintain all the vendor prefixes in the CSS world, you understand why we may want to think twice about, creating two different flags, because everybody will eventually want to maintain the experimental flag. So I think I'm with you on Isaac in the camp of
It's
and
ditch,
sharing. Yeah.
ditch the word experimental from the spelling of that config. Yeah. X forwarded for is another great one. There are some HTTP headers that were experimental and were added with an X prefix, and now it's just like we're stuck with that X forever, and it's kind of silly because it is a standard.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm in the camp with you. I think that was a good note. So that's good feedback. Maybe Roy.
I can circle back and put that on the RFC itself too before we ratify it. But otherwise,
yeah.
I mean, otherwise looks good to me.
Yeah, it can be just renamed to publish confirmation enabled. I don't know what is the pattern we use for this kind of.
We would just use it as a treat it as a Boolean flag. So the same as like -- save.
Sure.
I mean, technically you can do -y for yes to just automatically approve the confirmation, but if we're going to have it be a thing that you opt into, then it should probably be a Boolean flag, and we should just give it a permanent name.
Yeah. Right now the RFC actually uses both, like one to enable the experimental feature, and you can also use the --yes to just skip it. So you you're basically having like.
The problem is that like one problem is that --yes, it's kind of like --force, right? It says yes to everything. So, if you have, I don't know why you would do this, but if you have an npm init as part of your publish flow, then that --yes is going to apply to that as well. And you might want to just sort of more surgically say, this is the thing that I'm saying yes to and not that anything else.
Right. So it's probably a very good idea to just strip the yes flag altogether from the RFC.
Well, I mean, we could support it as well, but or make a mention that like, oh, and also if you have npm config yes set, then it'll also just auto approve the confirmation. But I think if we're going to have it be a flag that you opt into, which I think is a really safe way to go about it, it should be a Boolean flag that defaults to false, and then we make it start defaulting to true.
Sure.
How do we take care of the CI implementation then? Like --yes has to be a thing, or some like confirmation as a flag has to be a thing.
Yeah. So when I say default to true, I mean default to true in cases where you're where standard in is a TTY.
Yeah, it is indeed.
Standard out is a TTY.
So it's part of the RFC. If you're not in a TTY, like we don't do the prompt. It just stays the same as it is today.
Yep.
So it's just always automatic, no matter what, if you're in a non-TTY. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I think there was feedback last week about, I think it was from Wes actually, about might not have been. Anyways, there was feedback last time we talked about this about still seeing it in the logs no matter what, even though you're saying yes. They wanted to see that like it presented the like, are you sure you want to do this, yes or no? And then it was like yes was confirmed because it was a flag that was passed in as I don't know why, but I remember that being a thing that was discussed. So if we're just not doing it in a non-TTY environment, we have two different like code paths, right? If it's non-TTY, we're not bothering, and if it is, then depending on the flag, we're doing a thing.
Well, we have a flag, and if you're in a non-TTY environment, then it defaults to false, or it defaults to true. I don't know. We do have a Boolean not stop for confirmation kind of thing happening here. But the basic is like we default it one way if you're a non-TTY, and we default the other way if you are.
Yeah.
Cool. So just to time box this, because we have about 15 minutes left.
Yep.
Any other feedback that we want to give, feel free to make it against that. I think with a few just slight, very, very small changes where we can just potentially ratify this between now and the next call, potentially asynchronously. So cool.
Awesome.
So if you want to stop sharing, unless you want to show us all the code that's happening in your.
Or we can move on to workspaces.
Sure. I just want to be mindful that we did do a deep dive last week of that, and we do have about 5 or 6 other items on this agenda. So if there's folks that are actually on the call right now that want to get through some of that, it might be
That
best to
was,
use the time.
I know. There's just one item that I left like carry over to this call. That was the actual running subcommands, right? So I don't know. What do you prefer?
I'll give you 5 minutes to maybe jump into that specifically that you think you missed out on. But yeah, if you want to maybe.
Yeah, but yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I know we're also missing a bunch of the regular folks, especially Daniel, that had more experience on it and might have opinions. But basically, the way to filter out from the set of workspaces you have defined, filter out the ones you want to run that specific command against, right? We had a quick internal brainstorm in our Slack channel that maybe will be nice to also share with folks here about different ways of doing that. Yeah.
Can you summarize essentially what we were speaking to there, in terms of doing this, like running these subcommands?
Yeah. So basically, like we want a way of just filtering out or opting in to a subset of the packet workspaces you have defined on your current workspace. And so basically, instead of using like in the RFC right now here, we're only proposing like this filter option that you can define and like potentially describe some names of workspaces in here. But this was like, this is one of the comments in the PR that this is the part that is still very fluid. There's no definition on it. So some of the proposals we had, it's about maybe just like having a namespace workspace. So basically npm workspace, you define the name of the workspaces you want to apply that command on, and then you specify the command, pretty much like Yarn does today. And also like I was trying to have more fancy ideas way of doing this. So basically having a column to describe the name of each workspace as you want to apply that command on, instead of just like npm workspace. Then you can run like npm, then basically just having column and then the name of a specific workspace, and then the command you want to run. Maybe I can, sharing my screen, I can try to find the actual example I'm talking about.
Yeah, I mean, you could even write in your terminal just the commands, how it might look like. But I think what you're speaking to also alludes to the concept of groups or aliases is what you were,
Yeah, that was another discussion we had, like about maybe having that whole thing as being able to define groups of workspaces, or maybe just aliasing a workspace name that you have. So basically, this is the idea, right? Like you would filter out in any of these ways. So kind of like I want to just steer the discussion, like make sure we have it and we land in a better place where everyone thinks it's a nice UI interface, a nice API to work with these. But yeah, maybe basically just like creating an alias, but that's probably a second discussion we need to have moving forward. But I think like something like this, having a good API to work with workspaces will have so much benefit of having that group, that alias thing, combining them together. Like, so yeah, just this one we should probably wait for more feedback on the community then.
Yeah, like I'm partial to WS, but yeah, it's I think what would be good is just I haven't commented a lot in the threads yet, so I know that I have to give more feedback specifically in there. So
Yeah.
And since, as you noted, like we don't have the same group that we had last week, who definitely would have more opinions there, like Jordan and Daniel. I think it's best if we do any commenting on async.
Yeah, and I want to be mindful about the time here. So yeah, but basically just presenting this and like getting the folks to comment back, because this is the part we totally didn't even got into during the deep dive.
And we want to figure this out before we ratify the RFC.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. So it's essentially blocked until we figure out where we're going with that.
Well, Mike.
Yeah. And go ahead.
Yeah. Part of the deep dive to Isaac's point earlier, I thought we had sort of discussed that like first pass was going to be like X, Y, and Z, and from what I understood from the deep dive, X, Y, and Z did not include aliases or like running scripts in subfolders. It was just like, let's make workspaces work. So I don't understand why this would be a blocker for workspaces one as an RFC. Like, especially since we just decided at the beginning of this that like RFCs are going to be like the sort of template for what we're gonna, but not necessarily a strict implementation of. And so I don't think it's necessary to like suss out all this particular information before we like ratify the thing and say we're gonna work on that.
We could also just have a handful of open questions and kind of throw all this stuff in that bucket.
Sure.
And then,
yeah.
Have a subsequent RFC kind of post initial implementation that says this is addressing this particular open question, which is left on.
And I'm very okay with like our initial RFC, like when we're creating a pull request to like move it to accepted, it's like this is what we accept, or rather to say like implemented, to like updating the RFC, and like this is how we implemented it, this is how it actually works, this is the thing, perhaps.
I'm just gonna double down on. I don't think we noted that the implementation details were like. The RFC is definitely supposed to be where we suss out how we're going to implement this and what it's going to look like. So I don't think that we said at the beginning of this call that we were trying to change course and that we're going to drift from the actual like implementation in RFC so much as we were saying that there's certain things that we may not execute on and that we would try to communicate that was happening.
That's a better clarification. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I don't want to make it seem that we're out here trying to communicate with the community and trying to figure out, APIs and the way that these things are going to be implemented, like trying to suss out those details and then divert from that in any manner. So just want to be mindful that that's not what we were talking about at the very beginning of this call.
No, it's more like occasionally that is inevitable, right? Like we will, if we have 90% coherence between our plans and reality, we're probably the most predictable software team in the world. So 100% is right out. But I think that we should try to maintain credibility through those changes and updates rather than sort of just throw it away and say, well, yeah, we said it, but that's not what we're going to do.
Yeah. So, but what I do agree to what Michael was noting is limiting the scope or de-scoping will help us execute and move forward. So if we do think that this shouldn't be blocked because the initial scope of workspaces is going to be limited to just installation and not specifically running the subcommands, then let's pull that out or reference future considerations, as Isaac noted.
Yep.
Yeah. We can even right away open a second RFC about this.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. There's no reason, like, it seems that we created like a workspaces RFC and it's got to be the overarching, like, gigantic epic. And I don't think that's necessary. It can be like RFC V1, do this thing, RFC V2, do this thing, 3, 4, 5. Like let's have RFC, like, workspaces V10. I don't care. Like, it's as long as it's iterative, right?
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay, so good feedback. Let's take it offline. We're already 2 minutes out of the time box I gave. So, cool. Moving on. There's some historical agenda items that continue to get carried over, and the next few are definitely that. So there's an RRFC for Save Peer flag. Is there any movement on this or any discussion that we want to have around this?
So this is actually already it's I think implemented in the V7 beta. So
really?
And it's pretty uncontroversial. Yeah, we may as I think the only thing that's controversial is like should the save logic be different for peer dependencies versus regular dependencies? And there's some interesting subtlety there. Jordan was pushing for it to only add to the range rather than rather than replacing it. Like if you do npm install foo at latest -- save, it saves whatever the version was you got with a caret in front of it. For peer dependencies, you may want to have a somewhat more loose dependency range. So it might make sense to either, to have that save logic be kind of custom for peer deps. Now, I think the way that it's implemented now in the V7 beta, like I think it's fine as a first pass. And the real question is like, should we save peer deps differently rather than should we add a save peer flag? Like,
I mean, I don't have anything really to share on that.
yeah, I think we need an RFC for this.
Yeah.
It is actually a request for an RFC. Like somebody needs to write it up.
Okay, so I'm going to take off the agenda flag then with the intent or with the hope that an actual RFC will get created between now and the next 2 weeks.
Sounds good.
Ever the optimist.
Yeah, and we can always add it back on just to be mindful of it and keep it on our radar. So with about 5 minutes left, we have the PR essentially for staged publishes PR number 92, which is item 8 in our agenda. That RC is essentially the one I think that we've got consensus that we'll do a deep dive on next week. So for any folks that really have feedback there, either feel free to join next week or please give updates or feedback in the actual RFC itself. And moving on, number 9 on our agenda is PR number 76, signed documents. Again, this is something that has been on the agenda for a while. I'm not sure if we want to pull it off at this point or.
So I actually have I've kind of been going back and forth with Will Blankenship, Retro Hacker, on this PR in the last week or so.
Okay.
And essentially, I think that what we worked out was a pretty good series of steps to get us to something like what he's asking for. First of all, and I, in the interest of time, maybe we should just kind of go to that RFC and read the discussion there. But we kind of need to split this up into a handful of things that take actionable steps towards the kind of security overarching kind of security and signature stuff that he's looking for. The main thing is we need to like design and implement a way to actually do signature checking of just the NPM registry signatures that are already on documents today, which is not exactly trivial. And we need to figure out a lot of the same moving parts in order to do any kind of like bigger stuff like signing the document.
So I guess we'll keep that on the agenda then for sure, but because I don't think we're going to get to the nitty-gritty details in the next 3 minutes. But it sounds like that's good. I didn't realize that you had been going back and forth this past week about that. So
yep, go check it out.
I nominate that for the next deep dive. So not the one that's next week, but the one after.
Yeah.
Maybe. I mean, there might not be much to deep dive on, but it depends on how much progress we can make. But yeah, let's.
If only to split it into its bits and pieces, and then perhaps that deep dive conversation gets 2 actionable items rather than just 1.
Yeah, I think what we need is an RFC for checking the NPM signature that's on documents today, which is much smaller and much more attainable and gets us some tangible steps towards this bigger one.
Can you say that one more time? Sorry, an RFC for creating.
Basically, step 1 and 2 of the comment that I posted last week on PR 76. So check the NPM signature that we currently put on documents for disk tarballs, and get us to the point where we go from 0 signature checking to 1 signature checking, and that will kind of shake out a lot of the work that needs to be done.
Okay. Just to quickly move forward on the last three that have also been on the agenda for the last little bit, I think can be in some cases executed on. I'm going to remove the feature for prompting module type as part of npm init. There's intent on our end to get a create-pkg package transferred to the pkg.js org, which is an org that the package maintenance working group is trying to own, which would help essentially move this along. And potentially it means that we can close this out with that intent to offer that up as a means of solving for this. Wes, do you
I
have a
agree.
comment?
I was just going to ask, what do you see as next steps for moving on that? Do we need to open an issue? Is it because I don't think there's an issue specifically open on this in the package maintenance working group?
I'll follow up with that. It's definitely in my court. It's now the time for our policy is 4-week grace period for the existing author of a named dispute to respond. Right now, essentially, that package is being squatted on. There's no actual real software associated with that, so it's now essentially to go to the support folks in our camp. So I've taken the A on that to try to transfer that. So I'll make an issue on the package maintenance working group just to acknowledge that intent, and then I'll reference it back here when I close this issue.
Cool, because I would like to, I have a few things that I've been meaning to change with the other couple of pieces that I've built so far. So if we have a specific place to start working on that, I'm happy to start committing. So
for sure, awesome. And just to note, we are at time, but I'm going to take a couple of minutes. If folks have to drop off, I apologize. I'd just like to get to these last two items if we can, and at least give updates or remove them from the agenda. So number 71, RFC 71, RPR 71, verified account linking. I'm not sure if we had action items from the last Open RFC call. If not, I'd like to punt this and or pull this up for the next time we get together to actually have some meaningful conversation. If there's been nothing, then I'd like to poke the folks that are on that thread before our next call, just to ensure we have the right people in that call. So if we can note that as an action item, that will we'll poke the folks that have been active there. And then the last item on our agenda was issue number 506 against the CLI repo, which Corey Farrell joined, I think, our last call and gave a bit of context around this. Isaac, I think we had an action item to at least comment here and or take it offline to change maybe the language.
Yeah, so we literally just discussed in our stand-up this morning, kind of audit is sort of next up on the V7 to-do list. So we're going to first pass within the npm v7 beta is just like basically replicate the current functionality, and then we can also once that's done, we can take a look at updating the way that we report these things. And that may potentially be something we can also land in V6 prior to going out as part of V7, but it's all kind of in the same pile of work associated with NPM audit.
I think in terms of something actionable here, though, this technically isn't a bug, and potentially we should close this issue and ask Corey or folks to open an RFC if they'd like to see a change to the way that this is currently reporting.
We could, yeah. I mean, I'm not 100% sure this is even really RFC worthy. Like, we could just sort of improve the way that we report. Like, essentially what he's saying is like, you have a dependency, you have a meta dependency, which has an advisory against it. And the thing that you're actually depending on would pull in the newer version if you just reinstalled it or updated it. But as the maintainer of that top level dep, right? Somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, tap, how come tap is depending on this out of date version?" And I'm like, "Well, it's not. It's a version range. If you install tap today, you get the new version. But because they have a package lock, it never it doesn't update that nested dependency. And so there's a couple of things that are changing in V7 anyway. Like the way that we do update is different. If you just ran npm update, it would update everything. Audit fix will be a little bit more comprehensive as a result. And then also on top of that, what we can do is we can say, like, yes, you're getting handlebars as a sub dependency of NYC, but NYC is already updated and you're only getting the old version because it's in your package lock. So it's actually your fault, not NYC's fault. Don't go bug Corey about it. Or don't go bug Isaac about the tap being the reason. And I've gotten bitten by this too. Like users mean well, and they come to your repo and they're like, why are you forcing me to have something that's out of date? Or they send you a bunch of pull requests to update dependency ranges in really like minor trivial ways. So I think we should just do it. Like, I don't know if I would call it a bug or an enhancement request, but it's a good one. It's one we should do. So like, I think if we just took his suggestion in the CLI repo and roll with it for V7, like that may be just fine.
Okay. So if we can just comment on it, I've removed it as an agenda item.
Cool.
And I think that's good enough to make sure that it's off our radar for next week. Appreciate folks staying an extra 5 minutes here. Apologize, we got about 5 minutes started about 5 minutes late. But yeah, hopefully, again, we're going to open up an issue for next week's deep dive. So you can add comments and we'll make sure that we ping the right folks to join then. But until we see you either next week or the week after, thanks for joining today and appreciate everybody jumping on. Talk soon.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Everybody.
Bye.